All right, we are live today on LinkedIn and YouTube with two very special guests from Google. We're going to talk to Natasha Noy and Anurag Batra from Google Dataset Search. Super excited to talk about the origin, the mission, and basically what they're trying to accomplish with Google Dataset Search. They're here to really take questions from the audience as well. So as you're joining, think of some questions that you want to ask, the founder of Google's Dataset Search. I'm super excited to talk to them. Before we bring them on, I do have a question for everybody. As you're joining, if you can just type this in the comments, where do you go to find data sets, right? List all the areas you go to find data sets, or your most common site or link, or where you go to get data sets. I think that's going to be very interesting for us to learn. And without further ado, as you're joining and answering that question, I'm going to bring in Natasha and Anurag on a virtual stage. Hello, guys. How are you?
Hello. Hello.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for having us, Kate.
Great. Welcome. No, I'm super excited to have you here. And I see people are already joining. They're going to answer the question of where people get data sets. And as they answer that, I'd love for both of you to provide an introduction. So maybe, Natasha, we can start with you.
Sure. Thank you for having us, Kate. I'm really excited for the conversation and to hear the questions and sort of see what comes out of the conversation. So I'm Natasha Noy. I'm a research scientist at Google. I've been at Google for about 6 years now, I think, but have been a scientist and sort of wearing a scientist hat for a very long time, working mostly with structured data and making structured data and data in any of its forms available. And so a few years ago, we started this project, Dataset Search at Google, that we'll talk about more later. But basically, my passion has always been kind of understanding data and making it available to people.
Great, thank you. And Anurag.
Hi, everybody. My name is Anurag, and I'm a product manager at Google. Been at Google for a little over 7 years. I'm part of Google Research, and I focus on everything data. I'm focusing on a broad data strategy over there. And one of my passion projects is Dataset Search. Our vision is to make data sets a first-class citizen of the machine learning research world, and we want to make sure that everybody's able to find the data that they need. And if it's out there, we'll find it. So that's what drives our passion, and that's why we are here to talk to all of you.
Amazing. And I know I've definitely been there where I needed to find data, and I use Google for everything. My kids equate Google with kind of the answers to the world. If they have a question, and I'm like, oh, I don't know why we can't see stars or something. And she's like, well, just ask Google, and think four. So I think Google is definitely the answer to everything. And now you've got data sets. I'd love to know when was the timeline of when Google Dataset Search came out?
So I think I'll go back to a little bit before Dataset Search. So before I joined Google, I was in academia and was a sort of computer scientist in a medical school for a long time, and working with quote unquote real scientists, biologists. We had projects with folks in earth sciences and a lot of other sciences. And this idea kept coming up that, within our niche community, we always know where the data is. And, we always have friends that we can ask, but kind of going broader or trying to go a little bit interdisciplinary, sort of looking for data sets in a different field, it was always hard. And that was always an issue. And so I joined Google, worked on a couple of other things, just trying to understand how things work. And then sort of this idea came up again. And, in the sort of Google's mission is organize the world's information. And, here's the really critical information that a lot of us need that really needed organizing. Google search didn't work and still doesn't work for data sets because it's such a long tail there. Mm-hmm. And so we started talking about it with a couple of colleagues internally and externally. And I think the conversation that really drove it home for me was talking to a colleague of mine in earth sciences. He's actually a paleoclimatologist. For those of you who don't know what that is, I didn't. It's studying climate, sort of the history of climate from prehistoric days. So he works with data all the time, and super well-known research in his field, publishes in Nature, et cetera. And we asked him the same question, actually, Kate, that you asked today. Like, where do you go to find data? What are your sort of data search stories? And he said, just like recently, the last few months, I was looking for this data on temperature and salinity in North Atlantic, and I couldn't find it. And then I ran into a colleague at the conference, and he said, oh, it's EN4 on the UK Met Office website. And there were two things that really struck me about that story. Met Office website is UK Meteorological Office. It's not exactly an obscure place. And still the data wasn't really easy findable. And second, this particular person actually had colleagues to run into conferences. And of course, it was pre-pandemic times. We would actually run into people, which doesn't happen anymore.
No, we're going to wait
but the point was, right, for him, it required actually having a circle of colleagues to talk to. And then you think about everybody who doesn't have that opportunity, right? Who doesn't have that circle of colleagues, and new students, or people starting in a new research area. And that's where it's like, that just seems to be, we happen to be at a company that is actually a search company, organizes the world's information. Here is this part of the information that really needed organizing, and still does.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's interesting to hear the background of how that came to be. Maybe for those not familiar with what exactly is Google Dataset Search, can you just provide a very brief overview? What can people actually use that for? What can they do there?
In some sense, it's exactly what it sounds like. You search for data sets. You come to the site and you type in your keywords or something you want, sort of something about the data sets, and the results come up. And it's sort of both as simple and as complicated as that. But basically, it is what we call a vertical search for data sets.
Okay.
And I'm sure we'll get more into the details as the conversation continues.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just looking at some comments coming in. So Dylan is saying, hello, everyone. Where I go to find data sets, I usually do a Google search for public data sets, often finding ones made available by the government or universities. Also, there is a subreddit dedicated to sharing data sets. So that's where Dylan goes. So I guess it sounds like he Googles data instead of using Google's Dataset Search, which I used to do before I found out that Google Datasets existed.
And look, for some data sets, like for the really sort of popular ones, you will find them on Google Search as well, pretty high at the top. So it's more sort of the long tail that's where Google Search becomes much harder.
Yeah, and I think we'll get into this a bit later, but the filters and the customization of that search on Google Dataset Search is what separates it from a simple Google search for people to really understand that. Okay, so we have a question here from Thomas asking, how do you get all those data sets? What about rights to each data set?
I can take that. So I think the really, really key point is we don't actually have the data sets. We only have what's called metadata. We have the descriptions of the data sets. The data sets stay where they belong on the data repositories or any sites. And we view Dataset Search very emphatically as a search engine. We help you find where that data is. We take you to the data. Our goal is not to have the data, which is why sort of the rights question is not it's not the question that we have to answer, because we still take you to the data. The data is on some government side, on a proprietary site, on Kaggle, on Statista, on any government site, wherever. So we get the metadata and we index and present the users with the metadata that tell you you're looking for data set about X. Here is some data sets on that topic. Here's what we know about them. Here's where you go to get them.
Kind of like Google, I guess, where you search for articles. Google has not written all those articles, but they'll take you there, right? So I think that makes sense. And a question here from Scott Taylor. So are all the data sets open data, or do you also index syndicated and proprietary data sets as well?
Both. That's part of the metadata, whether the data is public, open, or not. Similar for those of you who are familiar, for example, with Google Scholar, right? You search for publications, and then you might go and you might go to publisher site where you will need to pay for publication or not. So we are pretty ecumenical about that.
Okay, we have a very specific question here. So from Sankar, does Google provide climate data, such as past hourly temperature data, precipitation data, etc., for a particular location? Anurag, you're saying yes. Yes.
Oh, no, I'm just nodding at the question. But so to kind of reassert Natasha's point from earlier, we are just pointing you to data that already exists. Right? So if this data exists out there somewhere, we'll find it. That's our mission. And so if you go search for it on Google Dataset Search, and if anybody offers this data, we will list that in the search results. We are getting better at it, so this is something that's still work in progress. But our mission is to do what essentially Google search does for everything else, which is if that information exists out there, we'll find it. So it's not Google per se providing the climate data, but Google Dataset Search will point you to who provides that data, so you can go look at the data and peruse it in accordance with the publisher's terms and conditions.
Yeah, I was going to suggest, Sankar, go to Google Dataset Search, type in your search, and find out for yourself, because I don't know the answer to that. So.
Neither do we, I think.
Yes, but I think that's the best way to find out, right? After the live session has ended, go ahead on Google Dataset Search and try finding data sets. I think I remember looking for data around elephants, just because I love elephants. I'm like, oh, let's see. And something came up. I mean, something always comes up when you do the search. I think it all depends on how much data will be available. And that's something that you explore just by doing that search. It's very easy to use. So I've actually used it before. Okay, so what sort of data can people actually find? Is there a limit to the type of data that people can find?
No, almost to a fault, to be honest. Like one of the questions that we've been struggling in the team as well is, what do we call it? What is a data set, right? Where do we draw the boundaries? And we try to draw very few boundaries, if at all. If someone thinks, if it's a data set to someone, you will be able to find it. I think that there is image data, there are tables, there is audio data, like any possible format on any possible topic. We try not to limit that at all. Basically, our definition of a data set is very much, if it's a data, if it looks like a data set to someone or to a reasonable person, it's probably.
Okay, and you have structured and unstructured data. I think you mentioned that, right? So it's everything. Do you have sensor data? Just curious if.
Yeah, sensors for sure. Like for something like salinity from ships, from some of the government, we have lots of NASA and NOAA data, and so that's a lot of sensor data.
Okay, cool. All right, awesome. There's another question here from Dylan. So, how many of the data sets in Google Dataset are static versus updated on a regular basis? And if they're ones updated regularly, how would you recommend creating a live connection to them in Python, for example, via web scraping, if that's even something that's possible? I think I know what Natasha's going to say. She's going to say Google.
I think, Dylan, that goes to your previous question on, you can use Dataset Search to find the data set. You can scrape the data set from the Dataset Search site. So that one, whether it's the API or anything else, is between you and the data provider. Our goal is to take it to the data provider.
Yeah.
And if I didn't answer your question, please.
Bring it back up. So the first part of the question was, how many of the data sets are static versus updated on a regular basis?
You mean, so we update our index very regularly, but as far as, that's actually a good question. We didn't analyze, like, how often do the data sets or their metadata, for that matter, changes. That's something we could try to look into. We don't actually have an answer. It's a great question.
Yeah. All right. So my question for you is, who is the target user, right? So when you created Google Dataset Search, who did you have in mind, and who do you actually see using this feature from Google?
I can take this one. So we target anybody who produces or consumes data. So researchers, data scientists, data journalists, developers, students, a lot of people are looking for data as part of their daily lives. And depending upon the role, we have often found, like in the research world, that a significant part of people's time goes into looking for and finding and massaging the data that they need. So we started building a product that is targeted towards taking this pain away. But then at the same time, what we found was that data publishing itself is not a very glamorous thing, and it also requires a lot of work. And so what we are trying to build in the long term is an ecosystem that caters to both of these parts of the data publishing and consuming cycle. So we want people who are publishing data to get more value out of publishing data, right? Their data should be more discoverable. It should be more citable. If they're doing it for commercial reasons, they should be able to get more traffic to it, and so on. And so that way it incentivizes the creation of data, and that kind of targets the data publishers. And at the same time, we want to make it super easy for people to find the data that they need. And so anybody who needs to consume data in their daily life, we want to target it to them.
Okay, so you mentioned those that consume, basically data analysts, students, data scientists who need data to either learn or work with that data, or researchers, data journalists. And then you mentioned producers of data, and I don't think this is something that comes to mind for people initially when they think of Google Dataset Search, because obviously you need somebody to give you those data sets, right? Or at least provide the metadata so you can tag it and properly allow others to search for it. So how would what would that process look like? Let's say I have a data set and I'd love to put it on Google Dataset Search.
Yes, excellent question. So the way we do this, and this is actually the way similar to Google and other search engines do any type of vertical search, is you don't give anything to us. You don't give anything to Google. And in fact, Bing can come in and actually build the same type of search engine because that metadata goes on your site. So the key thing, there are a couple of key things. If you have a data set that you want to make available to anybody through Dataset Search or any other means, first you need to have it on a page that's accessible on the web, right? So a crawler from any search engine, Google, Bing, Baidu, whatever, need to be able to come to that page. So then what web crawlers do when they come to the page, they process the page. They look at the HTML and try to get that from the page. But also, there's a mechanism that was developed by a number of search companies together called schema.org, which allows you to embed some tags in that HTML saying, oh, this page is about data set. And here's the title of the data set, here's the description, here's its temporal coverage, here's its spatial coverage, here's the license. And basically, whichever salient properties of the data set, that's on your page. That doesn't go to Google, doesn't come to us. But that's the markup, essentially those embedded tags or block of JSON LD that any search engine can understand. And we understand that it's not just for it's not specific for data sets. You can mark when you see recipes, when your Google Assistant gives you the steps in a recipe, that comes from that schema.org markup. When you do job search on Google, that comes from that markup. When there is a tracking package in your Gmail, that also comes from that markup. And I'm just not familiar with tools from other companies, but I know like pretty much any search engine uses that markup. So it's very straightforward to do, fairly easy. There are instructions linked from our site, from Google developer site, from anything. That's one way. Basically, if you maintain your own site, then you kind of add those tags. Or you can share your data set on any of the repository that will do that automatically for you. For instance, if you submit your data set to Kaggle and fill out the form with the description and title or whatever, Kaggle will generate that markup for you. You don't need to worry about it. Lots of other, like there are many academic repositories that do that, like Picture and Zenada and Data Dryad. So for those of you who don't want to maintain your own site, just choose the repository that already does it. The way to see this, can you find anything from that repository in Dataset Search? And then you just fill out the form and they will do it for you. I mean, you fill out the form to have it on their site. And once they have it, when they generate that web page, they automatically generate those tags. But if you want to have your own, maintain your own site, then you'll need to embed the tags. But it's pretty straight. Like if you can maintain your own site, you can probably add those tags as well.
Okay, so question here. So if let's say I have a data set, but I don't want to give it away for free, right? It's not open data. I want people to buy it.
That's right.
Google Dataset Search won't take that data and give it away for free. It'll simply just provide a link to the site and allow people. It's just a connection, right?
Exactly. It will say, you know what, you're looking for data set about, awesome elephants. Here's the data set from Kate's site, has the data set about awesome elephants. And by the way, Kate said it's not available. You can actually make that clear and like be there for Kate said there's this license that she uses for this data set. Data can be licensed just as any other creative work. And we actually pay a lot of attention to that and try to show the users what the license is. So Kate made it available for free for non-commercial users, for example, or she didn't make it available. But in either case, or maybe she wants you to just fill out a form.
Yeah.
And then you go to the site to get the data set. We don't, even if it's free, we're not going to make it kind of available for free. We're a search engine. We're very emphatic search engine. And yes, there are tons of, I don't remember, there's a significant fraction of the data sets on Dataset Search, I don't remember what fraction that is, that are not available for free. And in fact, it's part of the metadata. You can say this data set is not available for free, and we actually would even put the banner just so that users are aware, because sometimes data is expensive to generate, and we're well aware of that. And we share as much information as we have with our users, and then it's between them and the data providers.
Okay, perfect. And I know we're getting a lot of questions in the comment section. I'll get to that. Just wanted to finish the last thought on this topic of uploading your own data sets. Is there currently a review process for the data that prevents me from maybe uploading some really, really terrible information that then gets used by the general public, assuming they all go to, and find this data set? Or is there a plan to do something like this in the future?
I mean, we use techniques that are similar to Google search, just as you can find in the end, it's between kind of you and the search engine and the site that you went to understand the veracity of that data. We use much of the same techniques to sort of make sure things that appear on the site are what you want to appear on the site. But ultimately, just as you can find a lot of really nonsense stuff on Google search, I mean, Dataset is a little more targeted. There's probably less nonsense there, but there's it's basically gated by the same gateways as everything else. So it ends up being common sense and trying to understand your sources, which is another reason why we take you to the sources, because we believe that's the best way for us to kind of have you the signal of authority and veracity on which site it comes from. What do you know about that site?
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. So Jody, she doesn't have a question. She's just saying thank you. She had no idea this existed. It's a great resource for freelance data viz or other fun projects, and she appreciates it. So we've at least shown one more person what Google Dataset Search is. So I think that's already
welcome.
I think you already answered this question, Natasha, but maybe briefly, what inspired you to create Google Dataset Tool, and how is it different from Google Search? I know there are similarities, which we just discussed as well, but what are the differences?
So think of this as if you're on Google Search and you want to kind of cut a narrow but very, very long tunnel that only shows you the pages that have data sets. That's what Dataset Search does for you. You don't have to cut that tunnel yourself. Like, you don't want everything else that may be relevant to search. You really care for data. That's what Dataset Search does for you. I don't know, Anurag, if you want to, maybe you would have a different metaphor or something.
Yeah, no, you nailed it. Yeah.
Okay, I think following on to that question, so what are some of the filtering capabilities that Google Dataset Search has that maybe you can't find on Google Search?
Licenses is one. You can actually limit by free data sets or not. Of course, that information is limited what's on the metadata in provider's site. But licenses, when the data set was last updated, what is kind of the general topic, kind of the general discipline, geosciences, life sciences, etc. And what is the download format? These are the filters that we have right now. You can also, just as on Google Search, you can add limit by site, specific internet domain in the search string, in the search box itself. I think
Okay.
am I forgetting? I don't think I'm forgetting any. I think
Maybe
that's
data type, like
data
Excel.
type. So the download type. The
Okay,
download type.
download type,
Whether
yes.
it's CSV or images or a document, strangely still a large number of data sets are available as PDF files. Beats me.
Interesting. Let's see how that changes over time. Thank you for that. So question here from Scott Taylor, the data whisperer. If the data is not posted, can you still find it? So his example is Nielsen product movement data and D&B company data is licensed and not released to the public. So would you be able to find it?
If so, we may data probably not if it's not. We're limited by whatever is on the web and accessible to web crawlers. Metadata, but what often happens is data may not be available because, for example, the owner of the data wants customers to pay for it, but the metadata is available. We will be able to find the metadata that's publicly available. Publicly available meaning on the web, accessible to crawlers. If it's not published anywhere, if the metadata is not available, we will not be able to find it.
Okay. Yep. Makes sense. Thomas is asking very different question. How big is the team for the Google Dataset?
The core Dataset Search team is very, very small because, but luckily we can rely on a lot of infrastructure in the company. We don't need to build a search engine, like an indexing infrastructure. It exists. Like there are a lot of, we don't need to build a crawl. We just, we don't have our own crawls. So the core engineering team is very, very small.
Okay. Question from me, actually, and I don't know if anyone's aware of this, but is it free to use Google Dataset Search? Can anybody just use it?
It's completely free. You just go to datasetsearch.research.google.com and you use it.
Okay, easy enough. Question from Jay. Is there a way to get my data out of Google Analytics and into Dataset Search? I collect some very interesting data for a specific market. Also, should I mark up my stat page I show to the public with some sort of structured data markup on those pages?
I'll start from the second question. Yes, if you maintain your own pages, you should add markup. I'll post, so there is, in Learn More on Dataset Search, there's a link to the developer site that gives you the instructions. We can post them in the chat in a minute as well. But so yes, if you maintain your own pages, you should add markup to that. So for your question about Google Analytics, Jay, I think it goes to, again, it needs to be on a web page accessible to the crawlers with the metadata. So if you want to pull it out and publish it with some metadata on your own site, then that will be available, the next time they get crawled and indexed. Okay,
cool. I think you guys will like this comment from Susan. Oh my God, they do have 10 data sets. I'm glad you found what you're looking for. Everyone should go in, find what you're looking for, and let us know if you're finding what you need. But I love that.
So that's a good point. To that call to action, I would say that would be extremely helpful. If we were to get feedback on what you're able to find, what you're not able to find, like not right now, but like in your own time, if you're able to just kind of go give it a try, give it a run, and see if you're able to find something that you intended to find, or if there's something that you intended to find you think should exist, but you are not able to find. There is a link at the top right if you're on a tablet or a laptop. There's a small link that says feedback, and it's an icon, and you tap on it and you can give feedback to us. So let us know what you're not able to find. That'll really help us make the product better.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I think that's actually a key point, that if the data set is available, but it doesn't have metadata, right? It doesn't have those tags that I talked about, we will not be able to find it right now. So again, they're not very difficult to add. Most content management systems now add that, like allow you to enable them automatically. You don't have to go and do them separately. But there are lots of data sets there that we cannot find, mostly because they don't have the structured metadata available.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. The question here from Ravid, I asked a similar question, so we'll take Ravid's. What is the future of such dataset tool? What other features does the team plan to add in the near future? Ravid, you stole my question, but let's go.
All right, so thank you for that question, Ravid. So for now, we are focusing on expanding our coverage, making sure that if a data set exists out there that the publisher intends for the world to know about, then we find it, right? And making that as easy as possible for publishers. So that's our number one goal. And that's why I asked for that help. Help us kind of figure out, well, where are we succeeding? Where are we failing, right? So we'll spend considerable amount of time and energy on that part. Then the other thing that we want to do is make it super easy for people to filter and find the data set that they need. So we have talked to a lot of people who are using Dataset Search, and very vocally we have heard that they would love to be able to now kind of sift through the noise and figure out exactly what it is that they need. So that's the other thing. We also want to make our relevance better so that we are kind of like anticipating what you need and then kind of like put that more on the top and so on. And so that's the other thing. And then finally, in the longer term, we want to make sure that it's a vibrant ecosystem, that there are incentives in place for dataset publishers, right? So for example, if you have put a dataset out there, can you get statistics on like how many people are looking for your dataset, right? Or if your dataset is out there, how do we make it super easy for somebody to cite your dataset in their research, so you as a researcher or a scientist get even more credibility and more bang for the buck for publishing your dataset? So our hope is that once we do this, once we create a buzzing ecosystem whereby dataset seekers are connecting very well with dataset publishers and incentives are in place for dataset publishers, that the number of datasets that's available out there will explode. And that'll just make it so much better world for scientists and researchers.
Thank you. You guys have a great vision, I think. You know, for those who are watching us right now, if you have, and I know Anurag mentioned the feedback area on Google, but if you have comments on what you'd like to see, I'm sure the team would love to hear your thoughts as well, in case, you know, there's something you want to see coming out of Google Dataset Search in the next, I don't know, 3 to 5 years. Use some kind of number for yourself. But we have plenty of comments and questions here. I actually, before that, I wanted to quickly show a demo. This was not really planned, but I wanted to show people what Dataset Search looks like in case you've never seen it. So this is it, Dataset Search. I'm just gonna search for word weather just to give you an idea of how this looks. So you get a bunch of different potential data that you can scroll through and filter on the last updated date, download format, you have all these options, usage rights, topic, and most people's favorite, free, right? Can I get this data for free? So I just wanted to provide this quick, very brief 5-second overview of what that looks like, you know, in case people are scared to go to it. Very, very non-threatening. Type in a search and you're there. Jay had a question if this will be posted somewhere where he can watch again. Yes, Jay, this will stay on LinkedIn and on YouTube on Story by Data's channel forever, for as long as the internet lets me keep it there. Thomas says this looks so promising. I'm really excited that Google entered such a niche. Awesome. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's exciting. Let's see. Yeah, Jay also said thank you. He's excited. He can't wait to play with Google Dataset Search. I think you guys will get some traffic today from LinkedIn.
Excellent. Thank you, Pete, and thank you, everybody.
Yes. We have a question here from Kurt. He's asking, what does the data itself reveal about who's the primary user of the Google Dataset Search? Is it individual users, or do you see an increase from corporate entities? Does the structure of Google Dataset Search favor, you know, the individuals or corporations as far as usefulness goes, and who's the target consumer? I know we touched on the consumer already, but if one of you wants to take that question.
Yeah, so we have found that there's a lot of curiosity among the student community.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of students who go check it out. And then, of course, there's data scientists and research scientists who are checking it out as well. And that's been our primary user base, and they come from all over the world. And so they're coming from United States, and they're coming from India, and they're coming from Latin America, and so on. So pretty much everywhere that Google reaches, which is pretty much everywhere in the world, we're getting people. So yeah, and it's exciting to see it grow.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that. A question here from Adrian. He's asking, are there any REST APIs?
There aren't, no. What we do, so what we did, so there are no REST APIs. What we did, however, was recently we released as a data set on Kaggle, actually, just the metadata for some fraction of our corpus. Corpus basically is everything that we index. We pick the ones that are what we call citable, that have digital persistent identifiers, just persistent digital object identifiers, DOIs, and similar ones. And basically, we got like all the metadata that we have about them, and we posted that as an open data set itself. So you can download it and play with it, and that's while we don't have an API, we do share some of our corpus.
Okay, all right, thank you. And Raviv is saying that it's a very cool interface and looks easy to dig data. Yes, go dig some data. Let me just see. There's somebody had a question here. Okay, from Thomas. He's asking, so are you using the crawlers to search for data, and how do you differ from other data search sites?
Very good question. So we do not have a special crawl. It's the standard Google crawl. If you look at the bot traffic on your site, there's nothing special. And just as so when Google crawler comes to any page, it processes the page and it takes out all the metadata, all the schema.org metadata, be it about recipes, events, data sets, anything. And then when that sort of is in the index, we'll look, okay, we basically say, give us the ones that have data sets on that. So that's as far as the crawl. So we don't actually go crawl for data, but once the crawl happens, we'll look in the results of the crawl to pick out the data set ones. And the second part was, because I think it was actually different questions. So,
how do you differ from other?
How do you differ from other data search sites?
Yes.
Most of the other sites that I know don't crawl. You actually have to submit, or they so either you submit your data there and run it on search, or there are data portals that essentially what usually they do is they select several providers and build APIs around them, and so pull the metadata from those providers. So again, so what that makes it difficult to do is to get again to the long tail, the kinds of things like, high school has a website and they published a few cool data sets. A portal wouldn't know to pull that in. That's the only place. To the best of my knowledge, we are the only ones that is crawler based. That basically just goes out there on the web and collects everything. I could be wrong, and if I'm wrong, I would actually love to hear about that. There was one at UC San Diego a while ago, but I think that particular project has ended because the funding has ended. But if there are others, I would doesn't mean they don't exist, but I'm not aware of any.
Okay. Yeah, so if anyone's aware of that, let Natasha know. She'll look into it. There are two questions that came in that are very similar, so I'll just show you both of them and then you can answer. You have Thomas asking if you're monetizing the traffic now or planning to do so, like Google search. He's asking because he wants to know if the promoted sources are on top. And then Sammy has a similar question asking, will those dataset searches be affected by advertisements same as Google search? So I guess the main question is, will the promoted data sets come up first, or is it just going to be?
So we do not monetize it. We don't really have plans, because I hate to break it to you, but despite the people on this call who think data is super important, it's a fairly small number. We're doing it because it's actually the right thing to do. But people sort of data sets, folks who care about data, important as they are, and sort of as much impact as that has downstream, that number is relatively small. So the goal is not to monetize it. The goal is not to promote anything based on whatever. It's really, again, Google Scholars, for those of you who are familiar with it, is the best analogy. 15, 16 years after its inception, the results are exactly the most relevant, the results to a query. And it's kind of the same set of users, right? The same kind of scope. So, yeah.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for answering that. Seems like it's a curiosity in the audience. So Question here, it says LinkedIn user to privacy settings, so we won't know who's asking, but will there be a subscription expected in the future?
No. For the same reason that I just said,
Okay, let's see. Yeah, that's the same question. So Scott is saying you need to actually know what a data set is. Oh, he's going back to the part where the group is not that big. Yes. So you can't really monetize this data group because there's not too many of us. So yes, Scott, people have to know what a data set is. That's a good point. Yes, on that note, I've actually learned so much personally, and I'm hoping that we shared enough with the audience to get them interested into going to Google Dataset Search and creating their own searches, using this data to either do your college work, run your business, do some projects, learn data science, or whatever your needs are. But also on the flip side, if you have data sets to submit, definitely do that as well. And then as you're playing with it, provide feedback through that feedback form. But I want to thank you both, Natasha and Anurag. I just wanted to ask my question that I always ask my guests, and that is, where can people go to either learn more about the work that you're doing or to continue this conversation?
So first of all, thank you for hosting us. Thank you, everybody, for the wonderful questions. So there's a learn more button on the site, which will take you to a bunch of sort of useful resources. There's also an email, dataset-search@googlegroups.com, that goes to our small team, and we will try to answer. Feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. I think that's probably the best channels. And thank you so much for hosting this, Kate.
Absolutely, it was fun. And Anurag, where can people find you?
Same channels as what Natasha mentioned. So the email address, dataset-search@googlegroups.com. And also, please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to continue the conversation. Thank you all for taking the time to be here, listening to us, and would love to hear more about what you think on Dataset Search. So please do submit that feedback, especially anything that you are expecting to find and didn't find. We would love to hear about it. Kate, thank you so much for hosting this. It was such a joy to be on this.
Absolutely. I actually had fun, so thank you so much. And I'll post a link to Google Dataset Search in the comments right after the session, so people can go ahead, click that, make it easy for them and search for your data. But thank you everyone again for joining, and thank you guys so much for speaking today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.